In the middle of a crowded train station, where thousands rushed past without a second glance, one man collapsed in silence. No one noticed. No one stopped. But from the corner of the station, a starving stray puppy did what no one else dared. And what happened next would leave the world in disbelief. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now let's jump into the story. The train station was alive with motion at midday. Sunlight spilled through wide glass windows, cutting sharp shapes across the tiled floor. The echo of rolling suitcases blended with the high-pitched squeal of brakes and the constant calls of loudspeakers. Hundreds of travelers moved quickly, each face focused, each pair of shoes rushing toward a platform. In the middle of this noise and hurry, a story was waiting to unfold. Officer Raymond had walked these corridors for years. He was in his late 50s, with shoulders that once carried strength, but now held a quiet weight. His hair was streaked with silver, and his eyes carried the kind of wisdom that only decades of service could bring. He was known among station workers as patient and steady, always calm, no matter the chaos. Yet behind his calm face, Raymond had ignored the warnings his body gave him. His heart had been troubling him for months. That afternoon, he moved at a slower pace than usual. His boots tapped against the stone floor, each step heavier than the last. He adjusted his cap, scanning the busy crowd, watching families hurry with bags, teenagers checking their phones, and workers rushing to catch trains. He wanted to believe he still belonged in this fast-moving world. But suddenly, a sharp pain struck his chest. It was sudden, fierce, and unrelenting. His breath shortened, his hand clutched at his shirt. For a moment, he tried to steady himself against the wall, but his legs no longer held. With a heavy sound, he collapsed onto the cold floor. His radio slipped from his belt, sliding across the corridor. His lips parted as if to call out, but no sound followed. Dozens of feet hurried past, heels clicking, bags dragging, eyes fixed ahead. People were late. People were distracted. To them, Officer Raymond was invisible in that moment. He lay still, his chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. The bright light above the station ceiling blurred in his vision. He tried once more to lift his arm, to reach the radio, but strength drained from him. And then something unexpected happened. Near a vending machine tucked in the corner of the hall, a small figure stirred. It was a stray puppy, thin and ragged, with fur the color of pale sand and ribs faintly visible under its skin. The puppy had been searching for crumbs, nosing around discarded wrappers. But at the sound of Raymond's fall, its ears perked, its dark, wide eyes fixed on the man lying motionless on the ground. Hesitation lingered in its small frame. The world had often ignored this pup, just as it had ignored Raymond's collapse. Yet something pulled it forward. With careful steps, the puppy padded across the floor. It lowered its head near Raymond's arm and gave a soft whimper. There was no response. It pawed gently at his sleeve, then whimpered louder, nudging his hand with its nose. Still, Raymond did not move. Panic seemed to grow in the tiny creature. It circled the fallen officer, whining, tail stiff with fear. The noise of the station thundered around them, but for the pup, the world had narrowed to one man on the floor. The puppy lifted its head, scanning the surroundings with quick, desperate glances. People walked on, heads turned to schedules, eyes locked on screens, minds filled with journeys. No one noticed. No one cared. Then, above the corridor, the puppy's eyes caught sight of something. Hanging loosely from the wall was an old wooden sign painted with a simple red cross. It marked the station's medical ward, though few noticed it anymore. The small creature seemed to understand. The pup stepped closer to the wall, stretching on its hind legs. It nipped at the edge of the board, tugging and pulling with every bit of strength it had. The sign wobbled, squeaked, and finally fell with a loud clatter. Startled passengers glanced over briefly, then turned away. But the pup wasn't finished. It clamped the edge of the wooden sign between its small jaws. The weight was heavy, its body shook, yet determination burned in its eyes. With trembling legs, the puppy dragged the sign across the floor, weaving through the crowd. Suitcases rolled by, shoes merely stepped on it, but it pushed forward. The station, always so loud, seemed to pause in disbelief. At that moment, the ordinary bustle of the train station had shifted into something extraordinary. A forgotten stray was carrying a message no human voice had delivered. The story was only beginning, and no one yet knew how far the courage of one small puppy would reach. The sign was nearly as long as the puppy's body, but Dusty did not give up. Each step was a battle. The wooden board scraped against the floor, the red cross painted across it, now catching the eyes of passers-by. People turned their heads for a moment, then shook them in disbelief, thinking it was just a stray being strange. But Dusty's trembling legs carried him forward with purpose. The crowd at the station was thick. Travelers rushed with bags and tickets, too consumed by their own lives to notice the urgency of this small creature. Dusty darted between boots and rolling suitcases, weaving like a shadow. Some nearly tripped, others muttered in annoyance, but the puppy pressed on, gripping the wooden sign with his teeth as though the world depended on it. Behind him, Officer Raymond still lay motionless on the cold floor. The seconds passed heavily. Every moment mattered, yet no human voice had risen to call for help. The only voice was Dusty's, silent yet loud through his desperate act. A group of children noticed him first. They tugged at their mother's sleeve, pointing toward the scruffy pup dragging the medical sign. "Look," one whispered, "it's carrying something." The mother gave a quick glance, smiled faintly, and pulled her children along, never understanding the urgency. Dusty stumbled once, his paws sliding on the polished tiles. The board nearly slipped from his mouth, but he bit down harder, eyes focused ahead. The crowd blurred into shapes, and the noise of the station became distant. His tiny heart raced, not from fear, but from determination. At last, Dusty spotted a figure in uniform. Officer Lewis, young and barely in his 20s, stood near the ticket gates. He was fresh to the job, full of energy, but untested in true moments of crisis. His posture was straight, his hat new, and his eyes constantly scanned the crowd. Dusty's gaze locked onto him. With a final burst of energy, the pup pushed through the flow of people and slid to a halt in front of the officer. The wooden sign clattered down, its red cross catching the light. Dusty stood on trembling legs, his body frail but his eyes fierce. He looked directly into Lewis's face, and for a moment, the busy station seemed to freeze. The young officer blinked, startled. People slowed their pace to watch. Cameras lifted as some travelers sensed something unusual. A stray puppy, ribs visible, had carried a medical sign across a crowded station to place it at the feet of a policeman. Dusty let out a sharp whimper. His tail was stiff, his ears flat, his body quivering. He pawed at Lewis's trouser leg, then turned his head toward the dark corridor where Raymond lay unseen. "What is it, boy?" Lewis murmured, crouching slightly. At first, reason told him this was nonsense, but instinct whispered louder. There was something in the puppy's urgency that spoke clearer than words. The pup tugged again at his uniform, then bolted a few steps toward the corridor. He stopped, looked back, and barked once. The sound was high, thin, but filled with demand. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Is it asking for help?" someone said. Others shook their heads, uncertain, yet no one could look away. Dusty darted forward, then back, his movements frantic but deliberate. His eyes begged the young officer to follow. Officer Lewis hesitated only a moment longer before stepping away from his post. "All right, show me," he whispered, voice low but certain. Dusty turned sharply and ran, the sound of his paws tapping against the floor. Lewis followed, pushing through the tide of travelers, his uniform drawing glances. The puppy led the way, weaving through gaps, never slowing, never losing direction. As they moved deeper into the station, the noise of the crowd faded. The corridor grew darker, colder, the polished tiles giving way to worn stone. Dusty's paws echoed as he ran. His small body seemed to glow with urgency in the dim light. Then, at the far end of the hall, the truth came into sight. Officer Raymond lay still, his face pale, his breathing faint. The radio rested yards away, useless where it had fallen. Dusty skidded to a halt beside him, circling frantically. He barked and whimpered, pawing at the officer's arm, as if to prove his mission was not yet done. Lewis's eyes widened as the weight of the moment struck him. This was not coincidence. The stray had carried a message across the busiest part of the station, determined to bring him here. The young officer dropped to his knees, pulling out his radio. "Medical team to Corridor 3. His voice cracked with urgency. "Officer down." Dusty barked again, pacing in tight circles, never taking his eyes off Raymond's still body. The crowd had not yet arrived, and silence filled the corridor. But in that silence, one truth stood out. A nameless puppy had done what no human voice had managed. It had turned the rush of an ordinary day into a fight for life, a desperate attempt that no one would soon forget. The corridor was dim and quiet compared to the bustling heart of the station. Officer Lewis knelt beside Officer Raymond, his pulse quickening as he watched the shallow rise and fall of the older man's chest. The young officer spoke urgently into his radio, calling for medical support, his voice echoing down the stone walls. Dusty, the stray puppy, would not stay still. He circled Raymond's body, whining, pawing at his sleeve, his tiny chest heaving with each breath. His eyes darted to Lewis, then back to Raymond, as if to make sure the young man understood the full weight of the moment. Within minutes, the sound of rushing footsteps filled the hall. 2 paramedics appeared, carrying a stretcher and equipment. Their uniforms were marked with the same red cross Dusty had dragged across the station. The pup barked sharply, his voice bouncing off the walls, then stepped aside but never far from Raymond. Lewis explained quickly, pointing at Raymond's pale face and then toward the puppy. "He collapsed. I wouldn't have found him if it weren't for that little one." The medics knelt, checking the officer's pulse, attaching monitors, preparing oxygen. Raymond's breathing was weak but steady enough to give them hope. One medic placed a mask over his face, while the other prepared to lift him carefully onto the stretcher. Dusty whimpered loudly, pressing close to Raymond's arm, as though afraid to let him go. Lewis gently pulled the pup back, but Dusty resisted, his claws scraping against the floor, his eyes fixed on the man he had saved. "It's all right, boy," Lewis whispered, his hand brushing over the pup's thin fur. "They're here to help." The paramedics secured Raymond, lifting him carefully. The sight of his limp body stirred the air with tension. Lewis followed close, but Dusty darted ahead, running at the edge of the stretcher, as though guiding the way. The group moved quickly toward the ambulance entrance. The noise of the main station returned, announcements, rolling luggage, voices, but now dozens of eyes followed. Passengers stopped in their tracks, staring at the sight of a frail puppy running alongside paramedics, its eyes wet with urgency, its paws quick despite exhaustion. Whispers spread through the crowd. Some pulled out phones, capturing the scene as Dusty barked, his voice thin but insistent. "Is that the same pup that carried the sign?" someone asked. Another voice replied, "It's leading them." For many, the station's rush slowed to stillness. They had walked past Raymond without noticing, but now the story was unfolding before their eyes. Outside, the ambulance doors opened. The paramedics began lifting the stretcher inside. Dusty cried out, pawing at the step of the vehicle, his claws scraping as though refusing to be left behind. "Let him ride," one medic said softly. His tone carried respect, as though he knew the truth, that without this small creature, they would not be here at all. With a nod, Lewis scooped Dusty up and placed him gently inside. The pup immediately curled at Raymond's side, pressing his small body against the older officer's arm. The sight drew quiet gasps from the onlookers outside, many raising their phones to record the moment. As the ambulance doors closed, the siren wailed to life. Lewis climbed in, his young face pale but determined. The vehicle sped through the city streets, its flashing lights bouncing across windows. Dusty remained where he was, head resting on Raymond's chest, listening to the faint beat beneath the uniform. In the hospital, doctors and nurses rushed to receive the stretcher. Raymond was wheeled swiftly into an emergency room, the doors swinging shut behind him. Dusty tried to follow, but Lewis caught him gently, holding him close. "Not yet," he murmured. "Give them time." The minutes stretched like hours in the waiting area. Lewis sat with Dusty on his lap, the pup trembling but never silent, letting out soft cries that echoed the worry in the young officer's heart. Finally, a nurse appeared, her face calm but tired. "He's stable," she said. "He's resting now. You can see him soon." Dusty squirmed in Lewis's arms, ears pricking at the sound. His small body leaned toward the corridor, desperate to return to the man he had saved. The young officer lowered his head, whispering to the puppy, "You did it. You truly did it. He's alive because of you." Dusty licked his hand, his tail moving weakly. The bond between them was clear. In a world full of noise and distraction, one stray had heard what no one else did. He had answered a cry that never left Raymond's lips. But the story was far from over. As the hospital machines hummed and Raymond's chest rose in steady rhythm, Dusty remained close, ready for the next chapter of a miracle that had only just begun. The hours that followed inside the hospital were heavy with silence. Machines beeped softly in the background. Doctors moved with practiced calm, and the world outside continued at its usual pace. Yet in one small room, life was being fought for. Officer Raymond lay in the hospital bed, pale but alive, connected to wires and monitors. At the foot of the bed, curled tightly on the floor, Dusty refused to leave. His tiny chest rose and fell with quick breaths, his ears twitching at every sound. The stray puppy, once unnoticed in the crowd, now guarded a man who had nearly slipped away. Officer Lewis stood near the doorway, watching the scene unfold. The young recruit had seen many things in his first months on the job, but nothing like this. The loyalty of a hungry, forgotten pup was stronger than the indifference of hundreds of travelers. It stirred something deep inside him, a reminder that even the smallest lives could hold extraordinary courage. When Raymond finally stirred, the room shifted. His eyelids fluttered, his chest rose with a deeper breath, and his hand twitched weakly against the sheets. Dusty was the first to notice. He sprang to his feet, placing his front paws gently on the bed frame, his eyes locked on the man he had saved. Raymond's gaze found him slowly. Confusion flickered at first, then recognition. His lips parted, and with a faint, cracked voice, he whispered, "You stayed." His trembling hand reached out, brushing against Dusty's rough fur. The puppy pressed closer, tail wagging softly, licking the officer's hand as though to prove he would not let go. Tears pricked Lewis's eyes as he stepped forward. "Sir, he's the one who brought me to you. He wouldn't give up until I followed him." Raymond's expression shifted from disbelief to awe. His voice was quiet but steady. "Then, he's not just a stray anymore." Word of the story spread quickly. A passenger's short video of Dusty carrying the Red Cross sign had reached millions online. People across the city, and even far beyond, watched in wonder as the scrawny puppy risked everything to save a life. Comments flooded the internet with words like hero, guardian, and miracle. Yet inside the hospital, the story felt far simpler. It was about an old officer who had spent years serving strangers, and a small dog who refused to let him slip away unseen. Days passed, and Raymond grew stronger. Through it all, Dusty stayed at his side. Nurses laughed gently as they watched the pup follow every movement, whether to the recovery room or back to the bed. When Raymond shifted in pain, Dusty's ears perked and his eyes filled with concern. When Raymond rested peacefully, Dusty curled against the frame, finally allowing himself to sleep. Eventually, the doctors declared Raymond well enough to leave. He walked slower now, careful with each step, but he was alive. Dusty trotted beside him, his fur brushed clean, a small collar now fastened around his neck. Attached to it was a simple tag engraved with Raymond's badge number. The station welcomed them back with quiet respect. Where once Dusty had been ignored, he was now recognized. Passengers bent down to pat his head, children waved excitedly, and officers greeted him with nods. He was no longer just a stray. He was known as the Little Rescuer. At the entrance of the station, the community painted a mural. It showed Dusty standing tall, the Red Cross sign hanging from his mouth, his eyes fixed with courage. Travelers paused to look, some smiling, others wiping away quiet tears. For Raymond, the mural was more than art. It was a reminder that life had given him a second chance, and that chance came from a creature most people had overlooked. As weeks turned into months, the bond between man and pup only grew. Raymond, once used to walking the corridors alone, now always had a small companion by his side. Dusty walked with pride, his steps light but purposeful, as though he knew the weight of his role. The world had called it a miracle, and perhaps it was, but for Raymond, it was something simpler and greater at the same time. In the rush of ordinary life, he had been saved by a life no one had valued. And for Dusty, it was never about glory. It was about answering a silent call, about finding a purpose, about choosing to love when no one expected him to. Because sometimes the smallest guardian carries the greatest heart, and sometimes the most overlooked soul becomes the one who saves another. And so, in a world where countless eyes looked away, it was the smallest and weakest who carried the greatest courage. The bond between a man and a forgotten pup became more than a rescue. It became a reminder that even the tiniest life can change everything. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more true and inspiring stories.